What's going on, guys? MariK here, and ever since Generation 2, Pokemon has always been about expanding the Pokedex, and every few generations, mainly in Generations 2, 4, 6, and I believe in 8 as well, Pokemon has been all about giving new evolutions to older Pokemon to either keep them relevant or make them relevant, which they never were to begin with. Some of those evolutions have turned into some of the best and most cherished Pokemon of the franchise, and some of them really just failed to hit the mark and ended up way worse than the actual Pokemon that they evolved from. So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at all of the additional evolutions Pokemon have been given and ranking them accordingly. We're going to be going by the National Pokedex list. So first up, we're starting with Crobat here, and honestly, I liked Zubat and Golbat, despite the fact that in Gen 1 they had horrific sprites and they were a pain in the ass in Mount Moon and Rock Tunnel, but Crobat I think was a really cool addition and turned out to be a really good Pokemon as well. So I'm going to go ahead and put Crobat in A tier. He just takes Golbat's design, makes him better, makes him purple, and yeah, he's just super fucking fast. He's actually a pretty solid Pokemon for a playthrough. Then up next, we got Bellossom, which was a branched evolution from Gloom instead of Vileplume. And while she's a cute Pokemon and all, it's not really a good Pokemon to use. And I feel like Vileplume's just a better Pokemon in general as far as gameplay and stat distribution. So we're going to go ahead and put her in B tier. Like I said, design is good, but as far as usability, it's just, you're better off just sticking with Vileplume. Up next, we have Politoed, and while it seems to be somewhat controversial for its design from Poliwhirl to Poliwrath, I think Politoed is a pretty damn near perfect Pokemon. So Politoed's going to be our first A tier, or our first S tier. It's such a cool, goofy looking frog. Now, granted, if your main opinion is based on Misty's Politoed, well, that thing is just a goofy, ridiculous moron, so you can't go by that specifically. And while Poliwrath is a really cool Pokemon in and of itself, it does gain the fighting typing, and it gains a little more attack compared to Poliwhirl, but it's so slow, it loses all that speed with all that bulk, and so it's really hard to use it, even in a gameplay environment. Whereas Politoed is just a decent Pokemon all around. He keeps the water typing, so he's just weak to 2 types, and then, further on he gets Drizzle, which just makes him a better Pokemon overall. Up next, we have the first of the new Eeveelutions, Espeon. That's an easy S tier for, should be pretty much anybody. It is the most cat-like of all the Eeveelutions, which is kind of why I like the Eeveelutions to begin with, because I'm a big cat person, and Espeon is literally just a carbuncle, which is a cat. It is everything about it, from the ears to the way the body shape is to the tail. It is just a perfect cat Pokemon, and it's purple on top of that. When I first played Gold and Silver, when they first came out, and my Eevee just evolved into an Espeon while I was waiting for the opportunity to get a stone to evolve it, I was flabbergasted, and it easily became one of my all-time favorite Pokemon. Then we've got the counterpart to Espeon, which is Umbreon. That's going to be another S tier. I know you guys hate when we give out S tiers like candy, but, I mean, it deserves it. Umbreon is a better design than Espeon. I think more people like Umbreon than Espeon, so it must be. While I still like Espeon's cat-like figure, Umbreon is a better design for me personally. As I've gotten older, I've appreciated Umbreon more. And it seems like most of the world has as well, since it's, I think, in the top 5 favorite Pokemon of all time. Then up next, we have Slowking. I don't really have a lot of usage history with Slowking, just because Slowbro was easier to get a hold of. You didn't have to do trade evolutions and such. But also, Slowbro was just, seemed like a better Pokemon. Now, while Slowking has a higher special bulk compared to Slowbro's physical bulk, Slowbro just already was a good, cool Pokemon, and while I don't dislike Slowking, I just don't feel like it was a necessary evolution. and I don't really like the weird, like, beach ball collar it has. I don't know where that comes from. The shell on its head makes sense, but the weird collar that it has just doesn't. I'm going to stick it in B tier. It's not terrible, and I know it did play a prominent role in the Lugia movie, somewhat-ish, but, yeah, I think B. B's fine. Then up next, we got Steelix, and Steelix, you guys are going to hate me, is going in S tier. Onix was already a cool Pokemon, albeit just a pretty useless Pokemon. Even in gameplay, just playing through the story, it did nothing. Even super effective damage was pathetic. It was a decent wall, but rock and ground have a lot of weaknesses. In comes Steelix, which becomes a steel type, looks so much fucking cooler, and then just starts tanking everything. And it even has a decent attack stat. It's such a cool design from a Gen 1 Pokemon that was more or less useless to making it a Pokemon that actually had viability. Then we've got Scizor, and if you guys know me, you know it's going in S tier. I promise it's not going to be like this for much longer, but goddamn, Scizor is one of the coolest Pokemon. Scyther was already a cool Pokemon, but Bug Flying just fucking sucks. And while it did still have a really high attack stat, again, it barely got any flying moves. Bug was complete garbage, and still kind of is one of the worst typings. And Steel just made it better. It went from green to red, from sickles to these giant claws, and then became a Steel type with only one weakness. It's just the quintessential of what Onix was to Steelix. It was a bad Pokemon becoming an absolute monster, and kind of stayed that way for a while, especially once it got Bullet Punch in Gen 4. Then up next we have Kingdra, and honestly, Kingdra is a great Pokemon for a lot of reasons. One of the biggest reasons that most people know it for is it being Water Dragon. So at the time, it was only weak to Dragon. Ice was neutral, Electric was neutral, Grass was neutral. So until we had Fairy, there was nothing else besides Dragon, and Dragon was already pretty scarce in and of itself. It was also the second Dragon Pokemon we got outside of Dratini's evolution line. But the bigger thing that makes Kingdra such a special Pokemon is that with Gen 1, Seadra was actually a really good Pokemon, and then once they changed the stat distribution in Gen 2, its stats dropped. Kingdra basically gave it a Dragon typing and gave it back its original stat distribution, making it just a really, really solid Pokemon. Water Stab is already great. Dragon was but I mean, it was a great water Pokemon that just only had one weakness that was barely around anyways. To me, this is an easy S tier Pokemon just because of all the things it did to fix Seadra as a Pokemon, similar to how Steelix and Scizor were. It is somewhat biased, in my opinion, just because I love the designs, but also it legitimately was an evolution that made it a good Pokemon. Then, speaking of evolutions that made good Pokemon, we have Porygon 2. And I promise this is going to be the last one we're putting in S tier right now. I can't help it. It's such a good Pokemon. I love the design. Porygon itself was this kind of pixelated, pointy, with a lot of edges. And Porygon 2 just smoothed it all out and made it just better looking. And I love the fucking look of Porygon 2. It's just such a simplified Pokemon, but in a good way. And then, holy hell, once we got the Eeveelite, and it's like, oh, you could have Porygon Z, or you could have Porygon 2 that looks better, give it an Eeveelite, and it's a fucking goddamn tank. It's not the greatest thing to use now, because power creep since Gen 5 has really been a thing, but holy hell, Porygon 2 was just such a good Pokemon for so long, and it's still one of my all-time favorites. Then up next, we have Hitmontop, and I gotta be honest, I'm not the biggest fan of Hitmontop. It feels dirty to put a Gen 2 Pokemon down so low, but I think it's actually going to go in C tier. Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan were already cool Pokemon, and Hitmonchan was about punching, Hitmonlee was about kicking, and then we have Hitmontop, which is also kicking, and so it just kind of feels out of place. I mean, it's a Beyblade with feet. It's a really its design isn't terrible, but especially when it's standing up on its feet, it just looks so awkward. And the design to me just doesn't flow as well as Hitmonlee and Hitmonchan do. Then up next we have Blissey. This is another one that I don't particularly mind, but I actually think I like Chansey's design a little bit more. Blissey gets a little busy with the little like skirt thing it's kind of got, and then almost like the little tiny like fairy feathers. It's not a bad design, but it didn't improve upon Chansey's design in my opinion. It's just another design. So while it's not terrible, and while it was for the longest until Eevee became a thing, a much tankier version of Chansey, design-wise, Chansey was already just a simplified little egg, and I just liked it better. Moving on to Gen 4, and we have Roserade, which is it's a cool change on Roselia. I didn't like Roselia, to be honest, and Roserade just it looks cool. I like how it went from one flower to almost like having bouquets on its arms. I guess that's what we'll call them. At the end of its little branch things. Yeah, we're just going with arms, even though it's a flower. It's a cool design. I don't think it's worthy of being above a B rank. Maybe it's a B+. I don't feel like it should go up there with Crobat, but it is definitely an improvement on Roselia's design, which I would not even at all give a B rank. Then we got Ambipom, and Ambipom, I feel like it missed the mark. I kind of understand what it was going for, and the purple color scheme looks really good, but the hands on the ends of its tails look weird. Apom was already a weird-looking little shithead anyways, but Ambipom just takes the weird factor and gets even weirder with it, and its weird nose doesn't even make it better. I think it's going to go down in C tier with Hitmon top. It gave Apom an evolution to kind of, keep it relevant, and that's nice, and that's, appreciated. But they just went a really weird way with it, design-wise, that I just don't, for me personally, didn't hit the mark, and as far as I've seen from other people as well, a lot of the community kind of shares the same sentiment. Then we got Mismagius, which took Misdreavus and made it such a better-looking Pokemon. I'm not a big Misdreavus fan, although I do like Fluttermane. That's a whole other thing. But Mismagius is really cool. It's actually going to go up in A tier. It gave us another cool ghost Pokemon, and then kind of went with the popular witch theme that was going around in the late 2000s, because we had the Harry Potter movies and such. But it was cool. It's a cool design, and I really like it. Then up next we have Honchkrow. This is another really cool design, where I didn't really care so much about Murkrow because it just wasn't really a thing. There was no point in really using it, aside from the fact you couldn't even get it until late game in Gen 2. And Honchkrow just kind of takes the big bad boss vibe that goes with Team Rocket, and specifically Giovanni, and just dials it up to 11. It's going to go in A tier as well, just because it's a really cool design, even if it's not the greatest of Pokemon. But you can kind of see how the evolution actually progressed to get to that point. Then up next we have Weavile, and, for the longest I didn't think Weavile was better than its evolution in Sneasel. And then I realized that that was stupid, and it's easily an A tier. Sneasel was a decent enough Pokemon, but aside from the fact that Sneasel was an asymmetrical Pokemon, it was lacking. It was this really frail Pokemon, but there was just stuff missing from it. It just looked like there needed to be more. And Weavile takes that and gives it more. The cool head crest is really cool, the extra claws. It just looks like a more intimidating Pokemon than Sneasel was. Then we got Magnezone, and it pains me to put Magnezone in a lower tier, because Magneton is one of my top Pokemon of all time, and while I do like Magnezone, because it is bulkier and has a higher special attack, it is a little bit slower, which doesn't really matter, because Magneton's not a fast Pokemon anyways. It's going to go in B tier, though, because I don't think it improved upon Magneton's design at all. I love Magneton's design so much, especially in the older iterations with the older art style. Magnezone is a good Pokemon. I kind of somewhat see where they were going with the design, but it just doesn't feel like an improvement. Then up next, we got Licky Licky, and for all the people that don't like Lickitung or think Lickitung's design is weird, Licky Licky's is just way worse. Aside from the fact it's got a little bit more of like a deeper hue of pink to its color scheme, which I do like. The rest of its design, I just don't like. I almost want to put it down in D tier. I think I actually will put it in D tier, because I feel like it's a worse design than Ambipom and Hitmontop. And I don't know why. I don't know why you would want this Pokemon. It's just really fucking weird. Then speaking of weird, we have Rhyperior. And Rhydon is another one of my favorite Pokemon, just because I love the kind of kaiju-esque looking Pokemon. He's kind of like Nidoking, which is in my top 5 Pokemon, but not quite as much like Nidoking. He's like a light Nidoking. He's just not as fierce and badass. But Rhyperior just kind of loses all the charm that Rhydon had. It's stupid bulky. Its drill is just weird. The tail it's not like a kaiju-esque tail. It's like a weird shriveled tail with a big oddly shaped rock on the end. It's weird. Like, it looks like a Pokemon wearing an Assault Vest or fused with an Assault Vest, but it doesn't even have an Assault Vest to evolve. The Protector is just kind of its own other thing. I don't hate it as much as Licky Licky. It's going to go in C tier, but it is such a downgrade from Rhydon, and I mean, Rhydon can use Eeveelite, which is cool, and then you can also use stuff like Rock Polish and whatever to get it nice and fast and beefy. The only thing Rhyperior has going for it is its, what is the ability called? It's Solid Rock, or something. Basically, super effective attacks do half the damage or a fourth the damage they would. So that actually makes it a really tanky Pokemon, and because of that, I actually used it on a Sand team way back in, I think it was Gen 5 VGC I was using it. More just for that ability and for the extra stats that it gets over Rhydon. But its design just definitely is tiers and tiers below Rhydon's. Then up next we got Tangrowth, and honestly, while Tangela is not the best of Pokemon, this thing, it doesn't even look like Tangela is supposed to. Tangela is supposed to be all these, various vines and such, and Tangrowth looks like the vines, but, like, mushed. Like, if Tangela was supposed to be just a bunch of spaghetti noodles, this is a bunch of spaghetti noodles that are all just, like, clumped together because they were overcooked and then smushed, and it's just bad. It needs to go down here with Rhyperior. Yeah, I think it's going to go down in D tier. I don't think anybody will be upset if we put it in D tier, and I feel like I like it less than the 3 that we have in C tier. Then up next we have Electivire. This thing is actually really cool. I was not a big Electabuzz person, mainly because I started with blue version, so I got Magmar growing up anyways. Elekid I like. He's cool, a little plug outlet on his head. But Electabuzz I just don't really care for. And then Electivire is just such a cool Pokemon. He's got a cool ability, and while it maybe doesn't look like a natural progression as far as evolution, I'm not going to dock it points on that because it just looks badass, and it is a very big improvement over Electabuzz. What's not an improvement over its previous evolution is fucking Magmortar. This thing, Magmar was already a perfect Pokemon. Magmar, while I wouldn't even say it's in my top 20 favorite Pokemon, I really appreciate Magmar as a design, just like Magby is like my all-time favorite baby Pokemon. They're both great designs. Magmortar, on the other hand, is not. The weird cannon arms is just kind of weird. Its face is fucking weird. The color scheme is fucked up because you got this weird, like, pinkish color thrown in. Like, it was just such a downgrade. It was like a downgrade as far as, like, Rhyperior. I don't think I can put it down there with Licky Licky and Tangrowth, but it's definitely below these 3 as far as design goes. Then we got Togekiss, which is a pretty cool design. I like Togepi just because Togepi was, this cute little egg thing we all grew up with Pokemon. And then Togetic is kind of the egg, but then it's also got a body, which is a decent design too. Togekiss, I think, is a better design, but it's not going above and beyond Togetic, so I think B tier is pretty solid for it. It's a really good Pokemon with Serene Grace, but design-wise, it just feels like it's a little lacking, because it is just kind of like this giant fluff thing with wings. Then up next, we have Yanmega, which this is a really cool one as well. I think it has a better design than Yanma does by far, but the color scheme really falls flat. While the color scheme on the regular Yanmega looks okay, Yanmega's shiny form looks way worse than Yanma's. The bright colors are very diluted and dark on this form. I think B tier is pretty solid for it. It's not... It's a better design than Yanma was, but I don't feel like it's as good of a design as these that are above the B tier. Then we've got the first of the Generation 4 Eevee evolutions with Leafeon. I'm going to put Leafeon up in A tier for a grass Pokemon, despite the fact that it's so bad Pokemon-wise, like as a competitive Pokemon, or just even one to use for gameplay. Because grass is not known for physical attacks, where Leafeon excels in physical attacks, and it has better grass moves now, as far as Generation 9 goes, but when Generation 4 was a thing, there wasn't much for Leafeon to go off of besides, like, Leaf Blade. And even then, it just wasn't... There were just better grass Pokemon to use. It looks really cool. It looks like a plant-type Eevee evolution, but it just, overall, if you were using a grass-type Pokemon, there were so many better options. And then we've got Glaceon, the counterpart to Leafeon. I think I'm going to put Glaceon in B tier. I used to like it more than Leafeon, but I've kind of changed my opinion over the years, and it's a little too plain. The color scheme is nice, and, I mean, if we're even discussing shinies for Leafeon or Glaceon, they're not great. Glaceon, the body gets a little more white, and the blues get a little more bright. And then Leafeon, just the greens get more green. There's not really much going there, but for an Ice-type Pokemon, Leafeon's design feels a little less inspired, or Glaceon's does, compared to Leafeon, which literally looks like a Eevee evolution with leaves growing out of it. Then we got Gliscor, and Gliscor is such a cool Pokemon. I almost want to put him up in S tier. I feel like we're just going to piss people off, because, like, now he's back to putting shit in S tier again. It's going to go in A tier. I'm going to give it an A. It's a strong, solid A+. It's just... Gligar was already a cool Pokemon, but he was a cool Pokemon in design only. He wasn't great. He wasn't viable. Like, if you tried to use him in Gold and Silver, you realize how bad he was. Gliscor made him good. On top of that, like, getting Poison Heal was a cool ability, and it was a really cool Pokemon to use. It was actually good and competitive for a while in Gen 4, and he looks so much more menacing. His shiny is a really nice color, too. Like, he just all around is a better evolution of what he once was. Then we got Mamoswine, which, again, I think this is a huge improvement over Piloswine. I'm going to put it in an A tier as well. It's a giant woolly mammoth. I was actually really upset with Copperajah when Gen 8 released, because I get that it was also supposed to be like a woolly mammoth type Pokemon, except I can't stand that Pokemon. Its design is crap, it's ugly, it's just, like, Mamoswine literally just looks like it was taken out of, like, history books. And, I mean, it's what you would expect to see, you know, thousands upon thousands of years ago. Like, if we were going to rank Pokemon on how realistic they were compared to the actual animal they were based off of, Mamoswine has to be easily up there in maybe the top 10. Then we've got Porygon Z. I'm kind of conflicted on where to put Porygon Z. It's no Porygon 2 by any means, but I also feel like it doesn't have the charm that Porygon 1 had. It's not terrible, but I feel like because it's a downgrade from Porygon 2, I'm going to put it down here in C tier, I don't feel like it deserves to be up there in B tier, but it definitely doesn't deserve to go down in D tier either. It's an okay Pokemon design-wise, and I like its explanation, its lore for it being the way it is really cool and it makes sense, but it doesn't make it a better design. What does make a Pokemon a better design is making it look like a badass like Gallade. This is an easy A tier for me. I was not one of the people who thought that Gardevoir was a cool Pokemon in Gen 3. It just, to me, it was kind of like, okay, cool, it's this lady, psychic, whatever. And it was okay, but it just didn't... There were so many other cool psychic type Pokemon. And, I mean, I would take an Alakazam over a Gardevoir any day. And I'll still take an Alakazam over a Gallade. But Gallade just was a really cool Pokemon. Psychic Fighting was an interesting typing. And with the various, you know, physical psychic moves that we were getting, it made him a very unique Pokemon to the psychic typing, while also taking away his weakness to, you know, Dark, because he was a fighting type, taking away his psychic weakness because he is a psychic type. It's just a really cool Pokemon that improved upon its other option as far as I'm concerned. What didn't improve upon evolution is Probopass, and this thing's going in D tier. I could put it in F tier, but again, I don't know, I think it's worse than Licky. It's just Probopass, or Nosepass was already not that cool of a Pokemon anyways, and then Probopass is like, what if we make the top of it look like Mario's hat, look like it's got Wario's big-ass nose, and then the mustache to boot. It's like, I don't know what they were going for with this design, but they either hit the mark and it was just a really fucking bad idea, or they missed the mark and fucked it up horrifically. Then up next we have Dusknoir, who, this is an easy A tier for me. It took what was already a cool Pokemon and just, again, dialed it up to 11. Now, Duskull was cool because it was this little, you know, little goofy cartoon Grim Reaper looking Pokemon. And then Dusclops kind of made it cool, but also, like, it lost the floating ghost appeal because for some reason we put it on legs and didn't really make it fly like a Gengar or something. But then Dusknoir just was such a cool and creepy ethereal design that it easily outranks its previous evolutions as far as design goes. And I mean, its stats really stand up to a lot of more bulky ghost Pokemon that we just don't see a lot of. And then speaking of non-bulky ghost Pokemon, we have Frostlass. This thing's, it's alright. I actually think I like Glalie better, just because it's this giant ice head that just could just chomp you to pieces. I think it's gonna go in C tier for me. It's not anything offensive. It's just kind of really, it's just nothing to me. It's not, you know, like Probopass and Licky, but it just didn't feel like it was an improved evolution, and it just goes a completely out of the water different direction to Glalie, which already was a really weird direction from Snorunt. It just, none of them really seem cohesive together, and I would rather have Glalie over a Frostlass. And then we have Sylveon. You guys know I don't like Sylveon. I like Sylveon shiny. I will give it that. Sylveon would be fine to me if it weren't for the ribbons. The weird ribbon things, like, if they weren't flesh ribbons, it'd be okay. But that's really what kills it for me. I used to just be like, it's a fairy type, ugh. But I mean, that was kind of more just for just the sake of just shitting on the new fairy typing when it came out. I don't care about that anymore, and I do like it shiny. It's just the weird flesh ribbons, they're off-putting. I'm going to put it in C tier. Maybe it should be up there in B tier, but it's the first Eevee evolution that I didn't care for. And I mean, Vaporeon, Jolteon, and Flareon were all cool designs. Espeon and Umbreon are easily my two favorites. Leafeon was great, even Glaceon, but for me, Sylveon just didn't hit the mark. And I know it's good. I know it's a good Pokemon to use, and it's easily better than half the other evolutions as far as competitive goes, but it's just, I'm just not a fan of it. Then next we have Wide Ear, which I think it's a kind of interesting design. I don't know how much I like it, because I really wasn't a big Stantler fan to begin with. I'm gonna put it in C tier. It's not offensive, and I really don't have any problems with it. I just don't like it as much as the stuff in B tier. Again, it took a very insignificant Pokemon, and it gave it an evolution, which, I mean, it doesn't look bad. It looks better than Stantler, but that's really not saying much, because Stantler was already just a very plain Pokemon in my eyes. And then up next we have Cleaver, and I really just don't like this thing. It's going to go down here in D tier. To go from Scyther to Scizor was just already one cool Pokemon to a cooler Pokemon. But then they were trying to make this prehistoric version, and it's like, well, it, you know, became this rock type that just, it almost doesn't even look like it belongs with Scyther. It just doesn't, it's not an evolution where you can see it right away, and if you didn't know, you probably wouldn't know until you found out either through the Pokedex or catching it or evolving one, because it's just, they're too separated for them to make sense. And honestly, it just looks like a weird, gross bug that you would see out in the woods somewhere. Then up next we have Ursaluna. This one's not terrible. I'm trying to think. I don't hate the design, but I don't love the design either. I think it's going to go in C tier. Teddiursa, as long as we're avoiding the personality and what we see in the anime, Teddiursa is just this cute little bear thing. Ursaring was a cool, like, grown-up version of it. And while Ursaluna isn't a bad evolution per se, it deviates enough away from it that it just feels like it's misplaced. It doesn't feel as nice of an evolution as Ursaring, even if it is a better evolution stat-wise. Then we got Basculegion, and this one, I don't know. I'm kind of torn. It's not offensive. I guess it's a better than its evolution was. So we're gonna go ahead and put it in C tier. Basculin was already just this useless Pokemon that Gen 5, they're just like, we don't have enough water Pokemon. Well, let's make a fish. Let's make 2 of it. And why? Like, back in Gen 5 days, I ran into 3 shiny Basculin, and I hated it so much because of all the Pokemon I could have caught shiny, 3 stupid-ass fish that were useless and didn't fucking do shit. And they can't even evolve because you have to evolve a fucking white striped one. It can't even be the blue ones that I have shinies of for no fucking reason. The evolution looks okay, and it's better than what Basculin was, but that's not really saying much. Then we have probably one of my all-time favorite new evolutions in Annihilate. This is an easy S tier for me. First of all, taking Primeape, taking a Gen 1 Pokemon and giving it a new evolution was already fucking crazy enough as it is in a main game. Whereas, like, yeah, we got Cleaver from Scyther, but Legends Arceus is kind of a different thing, and to me it's separate. But also, Cleaver is not a Pokemon you're just going to see now. And Annihilate sure as hell is. Not to mention the lore behind it just being so pissed off that it died, came back as a ghost, and it's just an infinitely better Pokemon, is just absolutely mind-boggling. It was such a good idea, and the design is just top-notch. Not to mention just using it. This thing dominated early competitive in Gen 9 so much, especially when combined with the stupid little mouse thing. And I loved it. I didn't use the little mouse thing with it, but even then, it just wrecks face. It's such a cool Pokemon, and Primeape was already a decently designed Pokemon, if not great to use. But it already had good speed, it had good attack, and this thing just improves upon both of those, and it's a ghost type. Then up next we have Farigiraf, which they're just taking Girafarig and reversing the name, turning it inside out, rather. Which is just a really weird way to put it. I like Farigiraf. I think it's going to go in B tier. It actually makes Girafarig into a legitimate giraffe. Because Girafarig was too small and had too short of a neck to really live up to its namesake. And it's really cool that, for whatever reason, the Girafarig's head is now wearing the chain chomp tail as a helmet. It's a goofy design, but it's a really cool idea on the design. And it having the stupid ass ability it has makes it good, makes it usable, which is what we need. It's what we need for older Pokemon. You want them to be relevant, give them an evolution, but also give them a reason to be relevant aside from just getting an evolution. Because on that note, we have the Dunsparce. It's gimmicky, it's silly, I love it. I can't put it above B tier. I want to, but if I'm being realistic, it's just a bigger Dunsparce, bigger stats, and it's a meme. It's just a big joke, and I feel like everybody, including the Pokemon Company, have just acknowledged it, but I like it. I still like the joke, I like the design. It's not a terrible Pokemon. It improves upon what Dunsparce is. It makes it a better Dunsparce, but yeah, I can't in good faith put it below B tier, but if I'm being serious about it, I can't put it above B tier either. Then up next we have King Gambit, and where's he at? He's right. Okay, I'm not putting him there. I just want to move him. King Gambit's a cool Pokemon. I actually feel like I like Bisharp better than King Gambit, but I think King Gambit itself still deserves the A tier. He is a really cool designed Pokemon. He would just be a better design if he wasn't sitting on a chair made of his hair. What is fucking with that? And then on top of that, his movement animation in Gen 9 is him riding around like he's on like a motorized cart in like a grocery store, except there's nothing motorized about him. It's just a chair made of his hair. It's really dumb, but the rest of his design is good. He also takes Bisharp, who at one point was a decently solid contender for competitive battling, and gave him what he needed in abilities, moves, and stats to really make him, even now he's still a contender and competitive. I still see him every now and then in Day 2 in regional events. It's absolutely insane, but he's earned it. Then we've got Diplin, which it's such a goofy little... It's a goofy thing. It's a candy apple over Applin. It's going to go in C tier. It's not offensive in any way. It's silly. It's just a silly design that I understand they had to make it so they could make its final evolution, but Flapple was already kind of a goofy design that I liked. Appleton was as well. This one, it's just Applin just covered in syrup. It's goofy, it's inoffensive, and that's about all it is. Then we've got Archaludon, which I didn't like Duraludon. I still don't like Duraludon. I don't know where I stand on Archaludon, because Duraludon was like, oh, I'm this dragon thing. You're nothing like a dragon at all. There's no reason you should be a dragon type. And then you Dynamax into a fucking skyscraper, which makes, again, no fucking sense whatsoever. Oh, and then you evolved, and now you've turned into a bridge. Like, it's kind of ridiculous. And even just saying it now, I'm just like, I didn't like its previous evolution. It's just, I almost feel like I gotta put it in D tier. I don't know that it deserves to be down there in D tier, but it's just, I don't understand it. Yeah, you can make the argument that, like, Magneton is a magnet. It's what? It's just magnets. Man-made what? This is an entire goddamn bridge. And it's not even like it's a regular bridge. It's like a big-ass bridge. Like Golden Gate Bridge kind of shit. Like, what? Why? What is it? And how does building turn into bridge? Like, where's the logic with that evolution line? It's just too ridiculous. It may not deserve a D tier, but that's where it's going to be right now. Then lastly, we have Hydrapple, which... Now, granted, it comes from Dipplin. Dipplin was introduced in Gen 9, so I wasn't sure if Hydrapple should be on this list, because this is, you know, for evolutions for a Pokemon that was released in a previous generation. But since Dipplin comes from Applin, which is a Gen 8 Pokemon, and Hydrapple comes from Dipplin, I felt like it still should be on the list. It's just going to go in B tier. It's not offensive, and I do like that the Hydra part of Hydrapple is, it's supposed to be a Dragon-type Pokemon playing off the, you know, Hydra thing, but the fucking dragons are worms. They're the worms coming out of the apple, so I can appreciate the idea from the design, and if that's not what it was, then maybe I'm giving them too much credit, but it's not a terrible design, but I can appreciate what they're going for enough to give it a B tier at the very least. In all honesty, this list didn't go how I thought it would. I'm just as disappointed with myself as you guys are that there's that many in S tier, but in my opinion, they all deserve it. All 8 of the Pokemon that I have up there in S tier are all really fucking good designs, and they're great designs based off of their previous evolution. Politoed, I really like, even though it does stray away, but it kind of had to stray away. Poliwag to Poliwhirl was a good change. At Poliwhirl to Poliwrath, he just got more swole, and now he's pissed off because he's too swole. I like Poliwrath, don't get me wrong, but this felt like a good change in a different direction. Espeon and Umbreon, no, I don't see anybody arguing with that. Steelix, maybe, but I made my point, and I think my point stands. Same thing with Scizor. Kingdra is just such a cool-ass design. Seadra wasn't so much. Horsey was a cute little seahorse. Seadra was a spiky version of that seahorse, but it wasn't that great, whereas Kingdra really takes the seahorse aspect, and it goes along with the really cool looking ones you'll see in the aquariums and such. And again, it being a dragon type, it being Claire's ace, which Claire was a cool character if you know, don't count her whiny little bullshit not giving you the gym badge. And it restoring Seadra's stats to where they should have been to begin with. Porygon 2, enough said. Porygon has earned his right, earned his place over the years. And then Annihilate, I just don't see how anybody couldn't think that's such a cool Pokemon. So that's going to be it for our tier list for Pokemon's expanded evolution lines. I don't know what else to call it. It's just kind of what makes the most sense, I suppose. It's evolutions that were added after the generation the original Pokemon was introduced in. So it fits well enough. I'm sure people are going to have one, if not several, problems with our list, and you guys will let me have it for there being a total of 8 Pokemon out of 46 that are in S tier. But there weren't any we put in F tier, even though I dislike Licky and Probopass and Cleaver. I don't hate them. They're not the worst designs according to my personal preferences. So we left them in D tier. It's still not anything for them to be happy about, but for the most part, it kind of evened itself out between A, B, and C tier. You only had a couple down in D tier, and an okay amount in S tier, but overall, I think it evened itself out pretty well, and it's a solid list. You guys will let me know if you disagree, and if one of your favorites ended up in a tier that you think was undeserving of them. Feel free to let me know in those comments down below, and perhaps we'll have a civil conversation about it.